All right, let's get started. Welcome to B104, Building an Internal Streaming Solution. Today we're going to talk about how to build out that internal streaming solution. If you want to do live streaming in your institution, your organization, your company, whatever it is, please, I'm glad you're here. This is where we're going to talk about it. And the question becomes, how do we build out that architecture, especially if you're building something out for the first time, or perhaps you're taking an older infrastructure and upgrading it, and build it so that you can reach each of those remote viewers, whether it's your employees or whomever, and whether they're on a corporate device or a corporate desktop or a lockdown image, or on that pocket device, that BYOD device that they bring with them every day. So we're going to do that over the next 40 minutes or so. We have a fine panel of folks here who are very experienced at this, doing it either for other companies or within their own organizations, and I'll have them introduce themselves real quickly, and then we'll get started with a set of questions. We do want this to be interactive, so as we go, if you have questions for them, don't necessarily hold those questions for the end. Raise your hand at any time. We'll repeat the question and answer it for you so that we can address the things that you're trying to deal with and solve in your own organization as we go forward. So let's start. I'm Chris Knowlton with Wowza Media Systems. I'll be the moderator today, and we'll start with Andy.
I'm Andy Howard. I'm founder and managing director of Howard & Associates. So we're a consulting firm that helps organizations implement video communications, so video conferencing and in a lot of cases video streaming. I've done projects from an enterprise communications perspective for companies such as Aetna, Deloitte, Yara, which is actually a Norwegian company, Keurig, the coffee maker company. Also done video conferencing projects for WellPoint, NYU, some other clients. So prior to starting my own company, which was about 5 years ago, I worked for vBrick Systems for a number of years, who's an enterprise streaming company. And prior to that, Blue Coat Systems, and helped design one of the industry's first streaming media caches for real networks, if you can remember all the way back to that time.
And I do.
Hi, I'm Dan Sweeney from LinkedIn. Our team manages the streaming infrastructure that we use internally and externally at LinkedIn, and we also work on the production side of it, so we produce some of those shows. I came into this field from a webcam streaming of surf locations 10, 12 years ago or so, and that's kind of morphed into a production piece and engineering piece regarding streaming.
Great.
I'm Brian Walls. I'm with NASA. I'm at Marshall Space Flight Center, which is in Huntsville, Alabama. A few years ago, I was working in the office of the CIO there and basically built the architecture for the internal video distribution, streaming distribution there. I've moved on a little bit. I'm the chairman now of the Web Video Working Group, and I work in a program office that coordinates video, well, all of our imagery, production and distribution and standards across the agency.
My name is Alan Tardif. I work for Prudential in Newark, corporate headquarters. I've been there 32 years, and I brought the streaming to Prudential. My background's in graphic design. I went to a technical school, so I sort of was, by default, the person who knew enough about content that my group asked me to go talk to the network engineers because this streaming thing had to live on the network. So I about 1998, we started streaming with MMS, Microsoft Media Services, and all the way up to Sonic Foundry's media site, which is what we use now. And primarily what I deal with is live broadcast. So we take advantage of multicasting, and it's usually the executive's message to the entire corporation, or something, some response to something in the market. The market crash in 2008, things like that. So it's usually, there are a lot of people trying to watch the same thing at the same time, which if you know anything about unicast and multicast, it's really nice to have multicast.
Right. Okay, thank you all. Let's ask a few questions of the audience so we find out who's here and what it is you're trying to accomplish. By show of hands, how many of you have not yet deployed streaming in the company you're at today? All right, it looks like there are no hands in the air, so it looks like everybody is doing streaming. Excellent. And so I'm going to ask two questions, and don't answer until I ask both. But if you have a streaming solution today, which apparently is everybody, are you looking to A, refine or expand it, or B, replace it with something new? So by show of hands, how many are looking to refine or expand? Looks like about half the hands up, and how many are looking to replace it with something new? About the other half. Perfect. Okay. Thank you very much for that feedback. That might help with some of the answers our panelists give as we move forward. All right. So for each of the panelists, could you briefly describe kind of the key streaming media usage scenarios? I guess to some extent, maybe you've already done that, would you say? I guess, or would you like to explain some more about the scenarios? Or should we dive right into the deep dive scenarios that you each have?
I mean, we can talk about some of the applications. I mean, certainly corporate communications is probably the biggest one that still drives a lot of the purchasing in large organizations. You know, being able to deliver the executive broadcast or town hall, whatever it is very important to a lot of organizations, especially large distributed organizations like I think we have with a lot of the panelists here. Training is certainly an application that we see a lot. Digital signage actually is starting to become more popular for distributing streaming content to the digital signs. So I think those are kind of some of the user-generated content is another one that a lot of people are starting to implement as well, where they want people to be able to just take a real quick video of their own self, upload it to the server, and have that be viewed by others in the organization. So those are kind of some of the main ones I see.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, our main scenario, the main reason we looked into the solution we looked into was our company all hands, where that's the largest portion of employees watching at the same time. So while we can do an external event or people can watch YouTube all day at the office, that WAN connection gets saturated very quickly if you have half your employees watching a company all hands. So you need that distribution internally, and it also needs to be secure. So those are the two criteria. So our biggest use case is still that show that it has the largest audience. That's where we need that internal solution.
And events are where we have our big audiences. Something else, we have quite a bit of just sort of a low-level constant use of streaming is what we call situational awareness, where we have video that's almost webcam type stuff, looking at our control rooms, streaming down from space station, so people can just look in and say, hey, that's what we're doing, that's why we're doing what we're doing.
Right.
And then, of course, there's also the signage, the PowerPoint show that's saying what's going on at your local center, and the weather, our constant floor level.
All right, thanks.
Mine is executive communications, as I said before, also town hall meetings. We have a thing called the EOS, which is the Employee Opinion Survey, and one of the questions there, this goes up to the executive office, it's connection to message. Town hall meetings, we're a company that's all over the world, all over the country, and one of the points on the EOS that was scoring low is connection to message. So we started streaming the town hall meetings, and what was happening is the executive VPs for all of the business units started to see that number go up, business unit by business unit. They saw, the insurance side start to stream their town halls. That number start to rise in their department. Then over in finance, they said, "Oh, that you guys, you know what you're doing," or whatever. What was happening is the CEO was tying their compensation to that number. So that was a real incentive to get the message out to the troops at the ground floor.
All right.
So
Great. Okay, well, each of you provided a slide of a kind of a key major scenario either that you work with or that you're very familiar with and want to walk us through. So let's dive into those. We're going to start with you, Andy. And I keep trying to touch a touch screen that is not a touch screen. There we go. All right, so why don't you walk us through this and tell us what we're seeing here and how this applies to the customers you're consulting with.
Yeah, so again, sort of harking back to many years ago, although there's still a lot of organizations that are still using Windows Media to deliver video, Microsoft sort of packaged up this whole solution where you had an end-to-end solution. You could build solutions around that. A lot of organizations did that and kind of came up with homegrown solutions. Then some vendors started creating solutions around that. But it was all sort of tightly knit together. And there's been kind of two compelling changes that have happened in the last few years. One was the delivery of the iPad. I don't know how many years ago that was now, probably 5 years, where the iPad obviously can't view Windows Media video, so people started thinking about moving to H.264 for that. The second is Microsoft has stopped investing in their Windows Media technology, actually removed the multicast capability from the Windows Media Server in 2012, or version 2012. So a lot of organizations are now making that move to that servers and have to come up with a different solution. So, everything that they've kind of built their solutions on has sort of changed, so that people are looking to re-architect kind of the whole end-to-end process. And that's kind of what I've designed here. And what, with a clean sheet of paper, what I generally try to recommend is that the industry has gotten to the point now where I think it's better to sort of try to unbundle all these pieces so that you can go with best of breed for each of the different solutions. And that also gives you the flexibility that if there's something, new whiz-bang thing comes out in the production side of things, you can easily replace that piece of the solution without having to change your entire architecture. So, if you look at sort of from source to delivery, the video sources in an enterprise tend to be, a lot of times it's studios, it could be, cameras in a room such as this. A lot of times it's actually video conferencing is the source for the stream. So they'll video conference from one or two locations back to a central bridge or a production studio that receives that and then turns it into a stream for delivery out. And people are starting to do that even with soft clients like Skype for Business. Once that's received, you can do your production. That can be anything from just pass it along to an encoder to run it through a TriCaster or something like that, to do, put fancy graphics on it or mix the content in with the stream. And then that typically runs through some sort of encoding environment and gets delivered out onto the network. A lot of cases in enterprise environments, I would recommend multicast, especially if the organization has some experience with it and is already using it. Then that means their network's multicast enabled, and that's a very efficient way of streaming it. For some smaller organizations, you might even want to just go with unicast and implement an eCDN capability. And oftentimes it's a mixture of the two because, for example, mobile devices like iPads and smartphones can't receive multicast video. So,
and for those who don't know, eCDN is Enterprise Content Delivery Network.
Yeah. And then there's a whole management software that really ties everything together and is the source for where you manage and deliver your webcast from, where you house your on-demand content, where all the metadata and all the content that goes along with that goes. And then finally, if you want to reach internet viewers, you obviously need to send that out to a public CDN, public content delivery network, like an Akamai or Level 3 or somebody like that, to deliver that to internet users, because that's the most efficient way to do that.
Okay, thanks. All right, Dan, let's look at what you're doing at LinkedIn.
This particular example is based on our company All Hands workflow. So we have different levels of production. We have external productions that are then streamed internally. This one's actually based internally in an inside control room. So we have multiple cameras that are going into that switcher like you talked about. We either have the Grass Valley switcher or the TriCaster. We do a 720p 60 workflow. We then bring in the audio. And then we actually go through a closed captioning encoder. It's something we've added fairly recently that does the encode. And then we'll push that over to our Elemental. And then we have multiple streams that go out. We actually feed to Intercall or West as our ingest initially, and they push out to Collective. And Intercall will then feed out to those devices, those iPads and iPhones that will not work with a peer-to-peer solution as unicast streams. So that will do external streams or somebody who doesn't have the client. So I'm kind of jumping ahead here, but essentially our Collective piece is a peer-to-peer streaming solution. So that's an agent that's installed on machines that allows peering within the LinkedIn network. So if I'm a machine in Mountain View, California, I will pull in that 1.2 meg stream as an example. That will then be disseminated out within the intranet to other machines. So it's really only one or maybe two WAN connections coming in, streams coming into our location, and that's all sent LAN to the other devices. So that cuts down hugely on bandwidth use, and then that replicates out to other locations. So wherever that one initial machine with the agent installed receives a signal, then that'll transmit P2P over the network. We do not have a multicast network currently at LinkedIn, and this peer-to-peer solution essentially rolled up within a few weeks. Hardware-wise, it takes a lot longer to push through the red tape, but that's how quickly we were able to roll up the peered solution. So it's a little different to the multicast idea.
So what the live closed captioning, that's interesting, because I get that question a lot.
Exactly.
But then
That's what I was going to ask about too.
Yeah, probably open the, we
a
don't,
lot of times people say, "Oh, that's too hard. I don't want. I want to do it, but I don't know how to do it." So how does that process work? Is it
so that is currently being actually burned in. We actually do two separate streams at the moment because our
Okay.
players don't support decoding the encoder format, encoded closed captioning. So we actually send one stream that has no captions, so a normal stream, and then we have another one where it's burned in. So that essentially comes back, that it burned in closed captioning comes back out of the encoder and goes into another elemental live.
And
So
do you have
actually
just
multiple-
someone sitting there typing it in real time?
we use a service that is dialed in, or not, they don't call it, it's not dialed in anymore, but over IP, and they can listen to the audio only.
Mhm.
They do something very interesting called, which I can't remember the name of, speech to text. They basically, or re-speak it. So they listen to the text of our CEO or whoever is talking, and they re-speak that back out to something like drag and dictate. And the accuracy is huge, and it's a lot easier to get trained up on. So
Interesting.
it's a relatively inexpensive way to do it as
Mhm.
a side note. And yeah, like I said, that gets turned around and back into the video feed.
Do you
Works
have to
well.
delay the video feed, introduce a delay in order for that text to come back and get injected and be in sync?
Yeah, so because it's not sports or something, a horse race that you need to know the result of, it's okay to have that little bit of a delay. There's already inherent delay with the peer-to-peer solution,
Right.
Collective, by the time that signal bounces around, so it's not noticeable to the end user, but there is a little bit of delay. That's actually input in at the closed captioning encoder level to match that up.
And then I guess my other question was, with Collective, are you then installing on each desktop a particular peer-to-peer client that is listening for requests from
Yeah,
that,
I believe
the
they call it
subnet?
an agent or engine that sits on the machine. So our IT department was able to distribute that through whatever management software you happen to have managing your devices. So that went to Windows devices and OS 10 devices in the background. It's invisible, it doesn't show up on there. Obviously, we have lots of engineers at LinkedIn who did manage to spot it and see this little service running, but most of the time it's pretty transparent. So, and it automatically updates through that.
And is it only for desktops, or do you see it, does it actually work across devices for people
It's
who bring in
just-
those tablets?
The peering does not work across those at the
Okay.
moment. I don't know if that's in a future build or not, but at the moment
Okay.
it's those are just unicast streams that
All
are
right.
coming in.
But they can pull it from another computer that has an agent on site?
No,
or
I don't believe this thing is just
Okay.
strictly a
Strictly desktop
unicast.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Are there any audience questions before we go on? Because I want to encourage conversation. Robert?
This LinkedIn solution looks really interesting, especially when you look at acquisition strategies. Because I imagine, like, say, when you bought lynda.com, you want to be. It's not hard to bring a whole new company into the mix because it looks like it's a pretty lightweight install for this.
As far as like rolling out to other offices, yes, absolutely.
Can you repeat the question?
Oh yeah, sorry. So the question was, if you add to your employee base, in our case, we purchased lynda.com, and so we had an addition of how many employees? Yeah. So 500 employees pop in. We work with IT. Our two IT groups work together, and they roll out that agent, and it's that easy to spin up. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
I just was there any hardware necessary to upgrade on the network?
No, that's the benefit of that.
No hardware needed.
No.
Yeah, okay. Any other questions before we move on? Yes, sir, in the back.
Are there, when you roll out a new location, are there minimums to the number of clients you need to have in order to get that query to spin up at a location?
Sure. So the question was, is there a minimum number when you spin up a new location to take advantage of peering? There isn't. It's basically a single stream that will come down through the WAN connection, and then if there's 2, 3, I believe it's up to 8 per connection that before it splits out again from another person out into the network.
Okay.
Yep.
Great. All right, well, let's move on then. We'll go on to Brian and what he's doing at NASA.
So this is specific to NASA Marshall Space Flight Center. NASA has 10 different centers and some smaller centers, and traditionally each one has had very much its own freedom on what it picks and how it integrates video distribution. So we have some that are heavily cable-based, some are much more IP-based. We're moving toward having a unified organization that's managed by our network people. But this was, as it's currently working, which is pretty much how I designed it when I was working with it a few years ago. We have multiple different sources, satellite, antenna. We have the locals on a must-carry letter. We agreed with them, so they let us distribute internally. Stuff we capture ourselves, as well as network sources, including content from other centers. And we have the ability to do a wide area multicast, to share content, either broadcast quality, which is sort of a protected different network, and we're moving toward having a multicast network that will spread across all of the different centers. And that's supposed to be coming out later this month, which is something I've been working on for quite a while. As far as the workflow you see here, it's very similar to what we've already covered. We go into encoders, put it out multicast. I'm showing that we have Wowza and JW Player because on our Wi-Fi, we don't support multicast on our Wi-Fi, the way it's set up. So we are still using the Wowza, and later on, Bytech, who does the Easy TV, that's the player that we use for the multicast. They now allow you to do a failover to unicast, so we've pretty much gotten away from having a separate web page. But it allows us to reach both TVs with set-top boxes as well as all kinds of different devices, and has worked pretty well for us.
Great, okay. Any questions for Brian on that one? Okay, then we'll move on to Alan and talk about Prudential.
Mine is a much more simplified version of what you guys are doing.
It's so easy.
Basically, it's just video sources, video or audio sources. We do everything from audio only training sessions, single camera to multicam productions. With those, we go through a production. Essentially, it's like a sports production truck. We have studios. We have master control centers. We're also a cable network, so we do bring in antenna feed as well as cable feed, remodulate that, and we run that across the network. But when we're doing a live broadcast, we run it directly through the encoder, and then it goes through, we're using MMS to multicast, Microsoft Media Services to multicast with Sonic Foundry media site, and then that goes out to the desktop. Currently, we go to desktops, we go to VDI sessions, we'll go to remote RDP, not RDP, but VPN, Prudential assets, Prudential laptops that are outside of the network, connecting back through VPN. Our gaps are with mobile devices because the only thing that we can multicast right now is Windows Media. And Windows Media does not go to multicast. Windows Media does not go to mobile devices. Right. So that's essentially what we have at Prudential as far as the video production distribution.
Okay, thank you. All right, so we've looked through these four. Oh, Steve, did you have a question?
Yeah, I was gonna, are you concerned about Windows or Microsoft end of lifing Windows support multicast media? Is that going to impact what you do in the next generation?
You mean like in next year as the next generation? Yes. Absolutely, we're concerned. We are looking into some type of solution to continue multicasting.
So your question was about replacing, so given that Microsoft technologies for multicast are effectively obsolete now, looking ahead, which not as long range as we'd like, but short term in terms of replacing that Windows Media multicast capability. Okay.
Yes, we're definitely taking a serious look at it. Network engineering has kind of put the stake in the ground saying we're not broadcasting live 3,000 to 3,000 users across the network.
So are you going to look at Flash, or are you going to look at something else?
We're open. We're looking at some things right now.
So you're open to other choices besides Flash, or could be peer-to-peer potentially? How do your network engineers feel about that, given some of the newer technologies that allow you to do peer-to-peer with WebRTC and HTML5, for instance?
Peer-to-peer was actually my first choice 10 years ago when we were looking at this. I really like the peer-to-peer. The one thing I do like about peer-to-peer that's different from the solution we have now that most corporations have, peer-to-peer allows you to download a high-quality image, high-quality video, HD quality, to a device and take it on the road. I mean, you could watch the content on the plane, on the way to a conference or a business meeting, or in your hotel, and just have all kinds of content in there. If there's something that needs to be corrected on that file, that piece can be corrected and pushed down to that individual file, and it does it seamlessly. I liked all those things. The thing that network engineering architecture they really didn't like is the fact that we're going to put another agent on the machine.
Right.
Right now, there are a lot of agents running on machines, especially in the corporate environment, that scan for security. We're a financial company. We're looked at pretty heavily by the SEC and by the federal government for protecting personal information, and so we have to be very diligent with that, and that trumps quality. So while we want the best quality for a video streaming solution, we have to also play in the same sandbox with everybody else.
So Steve, I actually anticipated my next question, which was, which new technologies, protocols, streaming formats are each of you looking at as we go forward, given that the market continues to evolve pretty rapidly since adaptive bitrate streaming came out and a bunch of legacy technologies have been retired now. So Alan, you just sort of talking about what you're doing. Brian, let's hear from you as far as what's sort of next on your plate as you look forward to how multicast works and what devices you can reach with that, and other streaming formats that you might be considering.
Well, so internally, we're pretty committed to multicast, and for a lot of the same reasons you're talking, I haven't even tried to broach peer-to-peer with our security people because they hate those open ports that you can see in a scan. Might be able to do it, but multicast is a very good technology. What makes me nervous is that it does require some kind of a plug-in. Nobody's building into the browsers the ability to get to your multicast at the OS level. And plugins have kind of been going away or getting very limited capabilities. With Chrome's drop the NAPI type plugin, which includes the plugin that we use. So right now we're limited to Safari on the Mac and IE on Windows. It makes me a little bit nervous looking toward the future. I assume that there's going to be some solution. I would love to see an open source one. I'm sure there's going to be some money there as well for somebody that solves that well.
Right. Okay. Dan, how about you?
Yeah, for us, the internal streaming side of things is sometimes a little behind, your typical CDN style or even player side of things, because there's more complexity to it. So HTML5 player is really the next step. That should be this year with our vendor partners to be able to do that. That comes with adaptive bitrate streaming. That's probably one of the limitations we have now, is we're really only able to send one constant bitrate, so you kind of have to keep it in the middle there for anybody who doesn't have that great connection. And then the only real issues we ever have with streaming in terms of support or trouble is a plugin issue, and that will be if Chrome updates, Chrome, multiple stages of Chrome, and they do instant updates, and all of a sudden Flash plugin won't work for this particular size video window, and so that's where we run into issues. So that's where HTML5 will help us out on that side of thing. Distribution-wise, we seem to be pretty set on that.
Okay. And what are you seeing, Andy?
Yeah, I don't see a lot of opportunities for peer-to-peer. I know it's to me, that's kind of like you either love it or you hate it, or the organization's going to be receptive to it or not. And most of my clients just already have multicast enabled, so they haven't been going in that direction.
Right.
That being said, what Brian's point is, one of the reasons Windows Media was so attractive was because when it was, all you had in 2002 was Windows PCs in your environment. You didn't have to install anything on the desktop. That was great. But now, moving to H.264, there's really no solution where you don't have to install something on the desktop. Now, the best way to say you're not installing anything is to go with Flash, right? Because Flash Player is installed on most people's machines already. But, and Flash multicast works well, and I've had several clients that have utilized that. The question is, if you haven't gone that direction now, do you want to go there right now? Because how long will your organization continue to support Flash? There's a lot of and some of it's, I think, based on the media, trying to have good media stories. But how long is what are some of the security issues with Flash? And how long is that going to last? So I think for the foreseeable future, there's going to have to be some sort of plug-in or install on the machine to support H.264 video. As a multicast, I think there's some providers that are coming out with interesting solutions. I know Ramp has a way of multicasting HLS now, which is quite intriguing. I think some of the other sort of more enterprise-focused folks are looking at ways of multicasting H.264. So, I think it's too bad that the browser vendors have not supported that functionality more, and I'd like to see, hopefully, I don't know which standards body would push that more, HTML5, whoever's doing HTML5 or whatever.
W3C.
Yeah, W3C. It would be nice, because it's really technically, I don't think it's that big of a deal, but it just hasn't happened at this point.
Okay. Great. Well, let's talk a little bit about how you monitor the streaming you're doing today. Often, streaming architectures are built across several different departments, sometimes several different vendors, especially if you have network engineering involved and content producers. And then you have that CEO who wants to see the ROI and understand how many people are watching that webcast that he's doing or that all-hands meeting to understand if all that money you spent on multicast 10 years ago is still paying for itself or if you should upgrade to something else. So how do you, each of you, monitor and troubleshoot your live streams? Everything from the back end all the way down to the end users, how many people are watching and what kind of experience they're having. So let's start with you, Andy. What do you recommend to your clients?
Well, certainly, first thing you want to do is look at the, the event logs or whatever analytics capabilities your vendor provides you. And a lot of them have really complete solutions to give you sort of a backwards look at, well, what happened in this event? How many viewers did we have? When did they drop off? Things like that. What I think a trend in the industry is going to be, and I know like Media Platform, I believe they have a booth here, has come out with some new functionality where you can actually get a sort of a real-time quality of experience view as to what's going on, so that if you're having a live event, you can actually say, oh wow, we're having an issue in the Miami office or something. Is that a networking issue? Is it what is the problem down there? And you can actually solve it while it's going on. I know a lot of organizations basically just say, if you're having a problem viewing the screen, reboot your machine, and hopefully you can get it. And if not, sorry, watch it on demand. That's obviously not really the way that you want to support your users, right? So you want to be able to troubleshoot issues, as it's happening. And I think, I'd like to see more investment from some of the vendors on, easier ways to troubleshoot and figure out what's going on in the case of a live event. Because a lot of times still it's, hit the button and just hope it all works and hope the phone doesn't start ringing off the hook.
Right. Okay, Dan?
For us, our responsibility starts with the production. So we have production checklists and support there to actually make sure that video gets to the encoder. Mm-hmm. After that, we have a support system. I'll speak directly to the internal streaming because we do external streaming, which has a whole different set of analytics that marketing is more interested in. with this internal streaming, everybody's coming in through a single sign-on. So we all use Okta to validate people for security, and then also we can see, literally who's on there watching it. So that data is then turned around with a team within LinkedIn to then break that down by department, and we can see exactly how long each and every person has watched or not watched that. So that data then rolls back up to our corporate communications group, who need to know how many people watch, for how long, and actually get value out of that. Support-wise, we actually have very few support issues. We're an interesting place because we have Intercall and Collective in there. So if there is ever an issue, we did have an issue once with Intercall. The Collective piece was working fine, but Intercall had an issue on ingest. And so it was a little tricky sometimes tracking down where exactly that problem is. Our support, honestly, now is actually a Google form that people submit in, automatically pulls their name in, gives them the FAQ of kind of what the most common issues might be, including the obligatory reboot your machine thing. And then we do have built-in backup streams. So we have the closed caption stream. So that is another thing to push people to. Ultimately, we'd like to have just a whole separate platform as a backup. And ultimate backup would be just a simple unicast, pushing people to the unicast stream.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Brian?
Well, our streaming distribution is typically part of our network infrastructure, which means you've got the same trouble ticket and tracking and network stuff like that. I will say we pay a lot less attention to monitoring and analytics for internal streaming compared to external. So in large part, we hear that something's not working because somebody calls in a trouble ticket, not necessarily because we're aggressively monitoring, unless even when it's a big show, we've got windows open and lots of people are looking to see if there's a trouble so that they can do something quickly. But we have a smaller tool set than we do when we're looking at our external streams, where we're more concerned, where it's more of our mission to teach people than it is in reach.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
We have a really great support model at Prudential and also reporting. We use Sonic Foundry media management tool, and we get real-time reporting every 15 seconds. It refreshes. We use that, and we have someone in our operations control center who watches that and also is on call. If there is a help desk issue, they do call in. They're directed to that person who will help them at that time, get them back online. And sometimes it is reboot your machine, or they troubleshoot and find they're in a location where they can't get the stream. You'll have to watch the replay. After the fact, we do post the replay. We also run a report that will show us exactly when the peak viewership times were. And if they watch the viewership. If they see a immediate drop-off, they know there's a problem somewhere down the line. Mm-hmm. For higher profile presentations, like the state of the company address, we have a bridged call to the OCC where they're watching all the servers that are in line with this. We have redundancy, and if anything happens, something can happen. All the stuff is shut down in sequence, rebooted, and brought back up as quickly as possible. And we built that because it happened to us once.
Right.
We learned, and the executive office supports us 100%.
Yeah.
They do a great job.
Great. Okay, thank you. Well, unfortunately, we've reached the end of our time. I only got about halfway through my questions. I'm sure many of you still have questions. Our panelists, I think, are going to be able to stick around for a few minutes and answer your questions. Please come up and see them. If nothing else, maybe you can exchange business cards and you can follow up with them afterwards. Thank you all for coming and spending this 45 minutes with us, and please bring up your questions.